Welcome back to the Gains for Girls podcast. It has been the past week or so. It has been win after win after win after win. I'm convinced that President Trump wants to fulfill all of his campaign promises in the first 100 days so he can spend the rest of his presidency golfing at Mar-a-Lago. This man is on a mission. He has come into office like a freight train, which is good news. I'm scrolling on X every day and my timeline has never been this glorious. Last week we had Senator Britt on the podcast. Big advancements there. This bill is set to President Trump's desk where he will surely sign. So another win. Very excited to talk to today's guest, one of Senator Britt's colleagues, actually. But before we get into that, I want to tell you about today's sponsor. If you watched the past few episodes, you have heard me sing their praises. It is Good Ranchers. They have been amazing for me personally, and let me tell you why. Number one, no antibiotics, no hormones, no seed oils. Of course, the quality, it is so good that you will never go back to store-bought meat. And of course, it's convenient. It is pre-portioned. It comes vacuumed, sealed, so it cuts time on the cooking process, and you're reducing waste, and it makes meal prep a breeze. You can start 2025 and continue through 2025 with Good Ranchers' New Year, New Meat Special. You can subscribe to any box of their premium meats. They've got salmon. I've got pork chop here. This one is ground beef and chicken. So you can subscribe at goodranchers.com. And if you use the code Riley, you get $25 off, free express shipping, and your choice of one of those meats in every single order for an entire year. So again, that is goodranchers.com. Be sure to check that out today. Now let's get into today's guest. We are talking with Senator Mullin from Oklahoma. I'm a big fan. Number one, I love a cowboy hat, and that is a staple with Senator Mullin. But of course, far more than that. What really caught my eye, I've been following him and his success, everything he's advocated for, since I have found myself in this position and where this has become a passion for me. But I was watching Pete Hegseth's Senate confirmation hearing a few weeks ago, as I imagine many of you were. And I was so just enthused to see someone in that position, the position of authority, to so plainly call it the hypocrisy that we have seen time and time and time again from our elected officials, not even elected, unelected and elected bureaucrats on both sides of the aisle, might I add. So we're going to get into that today. We're going to talk about the Lake and Riley Act. We are going to talk about the Born Alive bill. We are going to talk about all things President Trump's cabinet nominees, their confirmations, what that looks like. So be sure to watch the episode here with Senator Mullin. Well, Senator Mullin, thank you for joining the Gains for Girls podcast. I am just over the moon to talk with you. As I was sharing with you before we started recording, I love Oklahoma. I love Governor Stitt. I believe he is one of the best. He may objectively be the best governor in the nation. Of course, Oklahoma was one of only, two states? I think the other one was West Virginia that turned totally and entirely red on November 5th. So very big fan over here. I saw you this weekend too. I didn't see you personally. I wish I got to meet you in real life, but I watched a video on X and it struck a chord in my heart as someone who's very close to my own dad. And it was this beautiful, amazing video with you and your daughter dancing. You're wearing your cowboy hat and I believe you're true fashion, right? At one of these inaugural balls. And so before we get into the conversation today, I just want to ask you, how are you feeling in the 4 days since the inauguration now?
Yeah, excited. Riley, I was the next night I was on CNN and they asked me, how was your day today? And I said, I woke up, the air just for some reason filled my lungs a lot better. The sunshine and the sunrise was just beautiful. And my protein shake for the first time tasted great.
Isn't that so funny?
Yeah, it just gave so much, I guess, hope, because I've been up here for 12 years. And for 4 of those years, we had President Trump in office, and it was a breath of fresh air, but at the same time, it was a very controversial time in our country. And then you had 4 years with Biden, and it was like, where is this world going to? I mean, it's what drove you into the I wouldn't call it the limelight, but to the front lines, literally to the front lines, and started taking the fight on. Which, you know, God's always got a plan for us and a path for us, and we just don't know it until we walk down it, and then we see, okay, thank you, Lord. But because of that 4 years, it's really brought America together and open their eyes to what the left was selling. And even President Trump and I were having a conversation after the election, and he was talking about, you know, people coming to Mar-a-Lago and meeting with him, and he says, it's amazing to me because these people were nowhere when I first was in office. And I said, sir, if you would have made it back into the White House 4 years ago, it would have been different. But people appreciate you more because of what they had to go through the last 4 years. And he says, yeah, that's right. That's right. And American people feel that way. You wasn't seeing the riots like you did in 2017, cars being burned, riots happening in Seattle and in Portland and in New York and in Chicago and Massachusetts. And you can just go through every liberal city you want to. And they were all having riots in 2017, this time in 2017. And instead, people are excited about it. More people are coming out for it. And I think we all see that the country has a real possibility to get back on track.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, total lawlessness and chaos ensued then, and certainly during President Biden's administration. And things have changed, right? They've changed a lot in the past, I guess you would know, in the past 5 years, since you and Tulsi Gabbard bipartisanly introduced, at the time, of course, introduced the Protect Women's Sports Act. Now here we are, where this is an issue that has seemingly fallen almost entirely on party lines, at least in terms of elected representation. I understand the Senate will hear this bill soon. I mean, do you think you can convince some Democrats, maybe in those swing states who very narrowly won their election, to get on board with something like what you and Tulsi introduced 5 years ago? Way ahead of your time, by the way.
Yeah, I think 2018, I think was when Tulsi and I first introduced it. And because at that time I had my girls wrestling, and they're still wrestling. In fact, I'll show you a picture real quick if you can see this. I don't know if you can see my daughter. That's her. She has pulled weight, and that she just made weight. She literally just sent this to me, and she's just totally wiped because she had to pull 4 pounds and since yesterday, and that was a look of death on her face, by the way. But and she's a
patient that athletes have, you know,
right. And she's a 3-time state champion. She's extremely competitive. Of course, her brothers are competitive. As we said before the show, her brothers 2 wrestle at Oklahoma State, 1 wrestles at OU, and she's got 2 younger sisters that wrestle too. And I've always said that my girls can compete with anyone as long as it's a level playing field. And it's the same thing with as women begin to speak out about this. But it literally took you standing up, because I remember when this first started happening, my wife at the time was the director of USA Wrestling in Oklahoma, and we were pushing to get girls wrestling into high school. It seems like it's always been there now because it's the fastest growing sport in high schools across the country now, but it wasn't at that time. There was only a few states that actually had it. And when this issue first started coming up, where they started letting biological males compete in female sports, the first person I talked to was an Olympian from Hawaii, and that's why Tulsi had brought her to me to talk to me. And she ran the 400, and her daughter does the same thing. And her daughter had just got beat in the state finals by a biological male, and her daughter was the fastest female on the islands. And they were showing the times that this guy would have ran if he was running against male competitors, and was like 230th. I don't know. I just throw a number out. It was 230, but let's say 238 in the country. And yet he won and stole her state title and prevented her from being a 4-time state champion in the 400. And she was upset by it. We started taking this to USA Wrestling at the time and saying, hey, this is maybe the sport that could lead this. I never thought about swimming. I never thought, Riley, you'd be the one that was leading this with swimming. But we're like, look, maybe this should be wrestling should take the lead on it. And I remember when I started talking to people, no one wanted to touch it. It was political, and people didn't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. And now it's became such a problem that I do think these senators in these states that President Trump won are going to have to take a hard look at this position. We saw it with the recent border bill. What was it? Border bill? What bill was it? It was the
Even the Lincoln Riley Act.
Lincoln Riley bill. We saw that there was 10 senators, Democrat senators, that switched, and 12. There was 12 of us. Sorry, I've got my team over here giving me numbers. So there was 12 senators that had ended up coming across the aisle and voting with Republicans on that. And by the way, if you look at those, out of those 12, 9 of them are up for re-election this cycle.
Of course.
But it doesn't. But it's politics. I'm sorry. Politics is more important than policy, and the only thing that's more important than policy is the timing. And so it's timing, it's politics, it's policy. It doesn't go policy, politics, timing. It's completely backwards here because it's all about perception.
Of course. Yeah, and you mentioned the Lincoln Riley Act. Huge win. Very excited to see that go through, to see it pass on President Trump's desk. I had your colleague, Senator Britt, on last week.
She's awesome, isn't she?
Oh my gosh, she's just like salt and light. What an amazing person. Very grateful for her leadership and, of course, your support of
Have you ever met her husband, Wesley?
I have not met him, but I know a lot, being an SEC athlete myself. Again, big fan over here.
He is a massive individual. I mean, he is huge. And we have been friends since the first time I met him. We walked in and we were at because we were freshmen together, and we walked into a freshman event, and Wesley's standing there. And I was like, oh, my Lord. And I walked up to him and I said, Wesley, you and I are going to be friends. And he looked at me and he kind of laughed because he's a big old teddy bear. And he laughed and he goes, oh, yeah, why? And I said, why? Well, when I see someone I'm not sure I can whip in a fight, then I'm going to be friends with you, so I don't have to find out. He started laughing, and we've been very close friends ever since.
That's a good strategy. And she's like a little tiny. She's so sweet. Even I was watching back the podcast that her and I filmed together, and even when she's talking about and you can feel her passion, how horrific of a situation. She's still, her demeanor is you can tell she's just one of the good ones.
Yes.
So nonetheless, it was a big win. And we've seen lots of wins over the past, like I said, 4 days. Right. I forgot our government could actually do things that benefit the American people over since the past 4 years. But it hasn't all been wins because this past week we saw Senate Democrats block the Born Alive bill. So first, can you clarify what this bill would do? Because there seems to be some misconceptions and deceit from the media, of course. And I think why this issue in particular is important to you.
Well, so let me start with the first one. Why is it important to me? I was raised conservative. I was raised in church, and everybody's pro-life, really. But it didn't really become a passion of mine until my wife and I had a pretty late miscarriage. And we had been trying for 7 years to have children. My wife and I got married, and I was wrestling college. She was cheering in college. I was 19. She was 18. And, we thought it was a great decision. It worked out great. We've been married 27 years, but I wouldn't want my kids to do that. But we tried for 7 years to have kids. And when we finally got pregnant, we found out on Christmas morning. And that was actually my Christmas gift. She gave me the pregnancy test. And man, we were so excited. And we went to the doctor, several weeks later, heard the heartbeat, went through other doctor visits, and, her Christy's body obviously started changing. We had got, pretty excited about names. And, later on down to the pregnancy, she went to the doctor visit, and I hate to say it, I didn't go. It was one of the few that I didn't go to. And she called me and she was distraught. And I ran to the clinic, and there was no heartbeat, and that was a death to us. And that at that point on, no one's ever can convince me that was a fetus, because that was our child that we lost. And it was much, much harder on Christy than it was me, because her body went through the changes. I mean, it hurt me too, but I had to learn to why it was so much harder on her. And I actually read a book on it. And fast forward, we ended up getting pregnant again 9 months later. We have 3 just beautiful kids. We think life is going good. And then these 2 beautiful twins came into our life at, later at 2 years old. And my wife, it took her months to convince me to go through the adoption with them. And I'll tell you, I actually pushed back a little bit. I feel sad about that because I felt like I feel such a selfish man right now, but I just didn't see it. And my wife was very patient with me, and she finally just pulled the ultimate trump card and said, would you just pray about it? And Riley, you're like, okay, how do you pray about that? Hey, Lord, make my wife's heart as selfish as mine. Or do you say, Lord, enlarge my heart? And since then, just Lord has blessed us abundantly. So we have 3 now that I say 3 we chose and 3 we got stuck with. So tell me, you tell me which one we love the most. And so we have Jace, who's 21, and he wrestles at Oklahoma State. He's our oldest, and then the twins, our bookends, are the ones we chose. And I would have 6 more if it was up to me. I mean, we have 6 kids, and I don't like my house being empty. We got 3 in college right now. So and I tell people all the time, if you're going to be pro-life, you need to be also pro-adoption.
Absolutely.
Because if we want these courageous women to go through the pregnancy, even though when people around them are probably telling them to abort the baby, and at the time it might sound like the easiest way out, then we have to make sure when they do go through that pregnancy and they're brave enough to actually have that child has a loving home to go home to. And so it's very important that those of us that are pro-life, we have to be pro-adoption and be very much involved in that. As my wife would say, put your money where your mouth is. And by the way, people come to us all the time and say, you're such a blessing to them. And I'm like, no. They're a blessing to us. I've never been able to love so much because of them. And it's changed our life, and it's changed our family's life, and it's changed the projection of our life. And it's blessed us more than you can ever imagine. And people was like, well, has it always been great? Listen, you have kids. I don't care what kid it is, you're going to have challenges. I was on the phone with Lara at 5:00 this morning because she was throwing a fit about having to lose weight. It wasn't a pleasant conversation, but raising kids as a whole is a blessing. And so I say all that because that's where the passion comes from. And there's very seldom a day that goes by that I don't thank the Lord for giving the individuals, the ladies that gave birth to our children, giving them the courage to go through the pregnancy. And I mean that sincerely. So let's talk about the Born Alive bill. The Democrats will out there and say this isn't true, that there's already laws that protect the fetus when it's born alive. And you go, no, there's actually a misunderstanding on that. The baby is never considered a baby until it is actually given life-preserving measure. So right now, say you're in Minnesota, and you go in for an abortion, and when the baby is discharged, if the baby at that point is showing signs of life, unless they actually put their hands on the child and begin life-saving measures, it's never considered a child. It's still considered a fetus. So what they do is they literally walk away from the discharge, is what they call it, the discharge, the fetus, and let the fetus at that point, because they call it a fetus, it's a baby to us, let it simply die on its own.
It makes you sick.
It's sick. And how are you a doctor, or how are you a nurse, and be able to be okay with that? It absolutely just is mind blowing to me how anybody can even do that. I've said this before. It's like genocide, and I get that genocide is typically a religious or a race to which they're trying to run out. But tell me which one is more horrific. When you start talking about genocide, you hear the most horrific things. They treat things less than a human. You treat them less than a dog, less than a bird. And that's the way they treat these babies when it's a botched abortion, because technically it's still an aborted fetus. And so they don't have to give life-saving measures. So they just leave the room. This Born Alive bill would stop states like Minnesota from being able to do that. And yet every single Democrat voted against it.
It makes you sick. So again, just to clarify, it would just ensure if a woman shows up to an abortion clinic to have an abortion, but as you said, it's a botched abortion, the baby is alive, right? It would ensure the doctor take life-preserving measures to save this baby that otherwise is born. I mean, it's out, right?
Right. The baby is completely out of the birth canal and is on the I wouldn't say the delivery table. It's about ready to be thrown out like trash. I hate to say that, but I don't mean to be graphic, but that's what it is. And if the baby now is showing live signs of life, they would be required to do life-saving measures. What happens in a lot of these abortions is that they're not accurate on the time. And so they'll say the baby is at 22 weeks and the baby might be at 31 weeks or 32 weeks. And so when the whatever procedure they do for the abortion, which I won't get into the graphic part of it, but whatever that procedure is, they're doing it for a 22-week baby. And when it actually starts leaving the birth canal, they realize that it wasn't enough chemicals that they put in the baby to kill it, and therefore the baby is still alive, and it has the ability at 32 weeks to still survive. And so that's what we're saying is at that point you have to give life-saving measures, and yet every single Senate Democrat voted against it.
Yeah, I can't even imagine.
I say they voted against it. They filibustered it, so they didn't have to take the vote. But all of them had signed up saying they're going to filibuster it. So technically, they never took the vote, but every one of them said they're going to filibuster. So the same thing, they voted against it.
Yeah, that's not a new tactic. But I can't imagine someone like yourself who tried, and your wife who tried, 7 years to conceive, to ultimately lose your first child. I can't imagine I'm sure you have a different perspective than they do on this measure. I want to very briefly touch on President Trump's nominees and all of the confirmations that we have seen, the hearings that have already happened, taken place, the hearings to come. I've got to bring up how you spent your time on the mic during Pete Hegseth's hearing. I think we have a video of it. Can we play that?
The senator from Virginia starts bringing up the fact that what if you showed up drunk to your job? How many senators have showed up drunk to vote at night? Have any of you guys asked them to step down and resign from their job? And don't tell me you haven't seen it, because I know you have. And then how many senators do you know have got a divorce before cheating on their wives? Did you ask them to step down? No. But it's for show. You guys make sure you make a big show and point out the hypocrisy because the man's made a mistake.
It was perfect. One thing that clip did not show, the little stitch of you, was Coach Tuberville's face in the back, which was pretty similar to, I would imagine, many people's faces in that room and those who were watching on TV that day. It was perfect, calling out the hypocrisy in plain language that everyone can understand and giving us a little behind the scenes, because again, if you're not immersed in the swamp, right? You don't want to believe that stuff is happening, because I think innately we want to trust our government. We want to believe that they have our best interest, but I can only imagine the things you've seen. I know what I've seen from both sides of the aisle, might I add, spending the time that I have in DC. So I thought it was just perfect. It's wild, though. I was watching HR 28 on the House floor, the Protection of Women and Girls in Sports Act. And the Democrats, they pull up with this big poster behind them that says the Child Predator Empowerment Act. And I'm watching this and I'm confused. I thought, oh, this isn't time for the women's sports bill yet. What bill is this? I haven't heard of this. What's on the docket? And they literally were saying that by preventing men from entering into the women's locker room and flashing themselves, you would be putting women, girls, in harm's way with child predators. I mean, I couldn't even, like, my brain couldn't even, I still can't grasp exactly what the point they're making is. It didn't make sense. But again, to the point.
It's a very hard argument for them to make.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't even, it doesn't make sense why they're saying it. And I think that's why the American people on November 5th overwhelmingly put in President Trump and put the Republicans back in charge of Congress, because it doesn't make any sense. Their arguments are so absurd and also inconsistent that you sit there and you go, I don't know what planet they're walking on. Do they just expect for us to believe every word they say, that there's no reality on earth except what they say becomes truth?
And like you said, the character attacks, they just don't stick anymore. We saw that this week. It didn't even take them 24 hours since President Trump took office to already start again with the Nazi Hitler stuff. People see through that. People know that Elon Musk is maybe like a neurotypical. He calls himself autistic, right? Like, people see through that. We've had enough. And so by all means, I guess, keep doing it.
Have you seen the videos of Tim Walz?
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Tim Walz is doing this and throwing his hand out, just like, I mean, you can't see it on video, but I mean, throwing his hand out. He was doing the exact same thing. Tim would either wave with both hands, or he would do this whole heart, Hell Hitler look, if that's what you want to say. They didn't say anything about that.
No, and every rally he did it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, last thing for you, what are some other priorities for you this Congress?
Well, the most important thing that we have is we got to reel in government. We got to get government working for the people again, and that means that the overregulation that's stymieing everything that we do and bringing up cost is a huge focus. So when you start talking about what do we have to get accomplished first and foremost, this sounds pretty wonky, but we have to get permit reform in, because without permit reform, it's very hard to build infrastructure, and you can't build factories. You can't get the permits done to put in the factories. A real quick example, we have a company wanting to come into the United States right now that makes 70% of the antibiotics in the world. At one time, the United States made over 90% of the antibiotics. Today, we only make less than 1%. Now, that's a huge national security risk, because God forbid that if we were to have to go to war again, antibiotics is kind of important. And who makes 80% of the world's antibiotics right now is China. So if we could bring this one company in, it'd be great. This one company was told it would take 7 years and over $1 billion if they could even get it permitted. I was personally working on this case. And of course, that was underneath the Obama administration. We have to change that with the Trump administration. If you want to start talking about inflation, bringing inflation down, you can't bring inflation down unless you bring energy costs down, because energy is the backbone of our economy. You cannot produce a product or deliver a product without factoring in the energy cost it takes to do both. So you have to go after that. Well, one of the big things is, how do you get that product? How do you get the natural gas? How do you get the crude? And how do you get the refined products from point A to point B, meaning from concept to delivery, without pipelines? And we have been getting one pipeline after the next denied by these agencies, and definitely underneath the Biden administration. Our supply and demand is growing because our population base is growing, and we have to put more pipelines in the ground. You just have to. This is the most efficient way to do it is through pipelines. If you want to take it through truck and through rail, that's fine. But then once again, delivery costs is factored into that. And then when you start talking about our national debt, there's a lot of things that can be done with that, but it's becoming where it's not sustainable. So you have to really get into the national debt part of it. I think there's a unique way that we can do this, and I'll be quick because this gets boring and you lose people when I mean, if you're not into this, you lose attention span. I get it. I do the same thing. It's like squirrel. But when you start talking about how can we bring down the national debt, well, just an off the wall idea, right? You start looking at Saudi Arabia, the UAE, the Qataris. You start looking at some very wealthy oil countries, And yet the United States has more reserve oil than any other country in the world. But you start looking at these other countries that are very wealthy countries. Why? It's because they own the energy that that their sovereign nation is in trust of, and then they take royalties off of that. Well, we have a tremendous amount of public land that, and I'm not talking taking private people's land. I'm talking about public land. So I own a lot of land, and I own the mineral rights on that. So if there's mineral rights coming out of it, I get a percentage of that. I get royalties off of it. We take public land and we just simply sell the permit, and whoever buys the permit off of it drills it, and they treat it just like they own all the reserves to it. Well, if we were to keep the royalties to it rather than selling the permit, but we actually join in a partnership because it's the American taxpayers' oil and gas. If we were to actually grab it and start using it as and we were to start using it as maybe a possibility to pay off the debt, and all royalties go directly to the debt, we could start paying that off much faster than anything we could ever do by cutting spending. So it's just, if you say what I'm working on, that's kind of stuff that I'm working on.
Yeah, well, these are things that I think your average American doesn't necessarily think about, but it certainly affects. Having my husband is a contractor, he's a builder, he does all that stuff. So dealing with the permit process, even here in a conservative,
you know it well.
I know it well. I know the trouble that we've had building our own house. We've got lots of land, so all of this it matters. It affects real people, and like you said, policy matters because people matter.
Yes.
So very grateful for you, for everything that you have done, for the stands that you have taken. I know that lots of craziness has ensued on Capitol Hill, especially with this week. You've got the March for Life, all the Senate confirmations. So I just appreciate you taking the time to talk with me, my listeners, and I would love to shake your hand when I'm back in DC.
We will definitely meet up. Absolutely. Maybe I can get my wife and maybe my girls up here too, because they're just huge fans of yours.
Oh my gosh, I'd be scared to shake your daughter's hands. They might break my knuckles.
No, they're sweet little girls until they get on the mat.
That's it. Well, I appreciate you, and for being a fantastic dad. Like I said, that video struck a chord. It really did, because I know your daughter, she'll remember that experience, that moment for the rest of her life. So creating that core memory is I think in 5-10 years, it'll mean more than I think either of you realize now.
Well, thank you. Thanks for sharing that. That's awesome.
Thank you guys for joining the Gains for Girls podcast. As always, you can check out all things Gains for Girls at OutKick.com. You can follow along with what I've got going on my X account. That is Riley_Gains_. You can follow my TikTok, right? President Trump has saved TikTok, at least for the time being, at Riley Gains. That Instagram is Riley G. Barker. I'm going to be posting more and more clips about the podcast and things that we've got going on around this country. So be sure to follow all of that and Gains for Girls at OutKick.com. Let's keep the wins coming, right? It feels good to win. I truthfully forgot what this feeling is like. Now, that being said, understand we cannot become complacent, right? It's inevitable that success breeds complacency, but complacency breeds failure. It is the enemy to growth and to progress. So onwards, full steam ahead. Lots of work to be done, but lots of wins to celebrate in the meantime. We will see you guys next week on the Gains for Girls podcast.
Hey everybody, thank you so much for watching. The fight to save women's sports and restore common sense is far from over, and I continue the conversation every week. So make sure to catch more content over here and subscribe to OutKick so you don't miss a thing.